Yeah, so thank you very much for not leaving after the beers and the break, and the food is almost all gone. So I'm here to talk a little bit about lessons, I guess, I learned from messaging strangers on the internet in a language I did not speak. I'm going to share a little bit about this experience and try to draw a parallel between it and learning new things in technology as well, because I think there's quite a lot of overlap there. And without further ado, let's get started. I guess if you read the title, you probably expected that they didn't like it. You know, strangers, language I did not speak. I did it very poorly. That's it. Thank you very much for coming. And maybe not, but I actually have a little bit of a story. So first of all, so who am I? My name is Leo or Leo, depending on which language. I'm a non-binary person. I was born in Brazil. I lived in Jersey in the UK for 12 years, and I've been living in Castamare in Portugal since October 2021. I really like TypeScript, functional programming, and everything related to web development. And I'm currently a senior full stack developer at a company called Pinpoint. We do applicant tracking systems, so helping people hire other people for their companies. And yeah, so how did it all start? It was June 2020, and we had a pandemic in lockdown. I was really bored, as most people. Kind of needed something to keep myself sane, and I, after talking to some friends, I decided that I would learn Spanish instead of baking sourdough, banana bread, or redecorating my rental flat. So I had a plan, and for context, Spanish is not the first language I decided to learn other than my native language. Like English would be the first one, I guess. But my plan was to exchange at least 50 messages every day with just random people. I used an app called HelloTalk. It's an app for language learning. It has a few tools for like translating messages and other features that assist in the learning of languages. I also wanted to watch videos in Spanish with Spanish subtitles, because that's very important when you're trying to learn a language, to not use subtitles in a language that you speak and already understand. I also wanted to start listening to music in Spanish and podcasts, everything that could help me kind of get used to how the language sounds like. And yeah, so I had my plan kind of set, and I was ready to get started. How did it go? Kind of like that, really. As I said, I speak Portuguese, fluently, Brazilian Portuguese, slightly different from what most folks in here maybe. But knowing Portuguese did not help me as much as you would think. And especially because Brazilian Portuguese is very simple in its grammar compared to like European Portuguese, I guess, and Spanish. So also I had to use dictionary apps and translations for everything at the beginning, because I couldn't say anything past hola, buenos dias, and so I was relying on these apps all the time. I also had an awful accent. I wouldn't dare have a recording of myself when I started. I would like to think I'm better now, but this is how it all started. After a little bit, so fast forward maybe 6 months, I started to learn more words. I could write messages without relying on dictionaries and translations all the time. I started to understand what people would say, so I could listen to them and not have to ask them to repeat themselves every time, time and time again. So, things started getting a bit better. If you know Spanish culture, you probably know this is Berto Romero. He's a comedian in Spain, very famous one. So yeah, I started to recall things quicker. I could understand most native accents. Maybe Chilean accent was still a little bit challenging. Some of the accents from Spain, like Andalusia, for example, is a bit difficult when you're getting started. And verb conjugations also became easier. So, I didn't have to look up how to say something in like second person plural every single time I wanted to talk to a group of people. To this day, I still have a bit of a mixed accent, but that happens when you're learning, an additional language. You learn it from different sources, and different people speak different ways. Your accent will almost always be quite inconsistent. I also have that in English, and that's just how it is, really. With that being said, so I kind of summarize my learning of Spanish quite a bit, because the focus of the talk is actually to how to learn new things in technology. So after speaking to a lot of people, and I've coached people and mentored a lot of people in the past as well, I kind of saw a few parallels from this experience of learning a new language and coming into a new technology or a new programming language, a new area in, in the industry. And yeah, I kind of want to get a few parallels from learning a spoken language to, a programming language, or even an area within technology. So the first thing I want to talk about is identifying goals, the importance of taking small steps when you're learning something. We don't want to kind of try too much at the same time. Practicing regularly is very important. In the case of spoken languages, I think if you ever try to, and a lot of people in here speak English, so you have already an additional language. If you don't practice it often enough, you find that you end up forgetting things. And it happened to me, for example. I lived in the UK for a long time. When I started looking at houses here in Portugal, and started talking to people in here about like kind of moving here, there was a lot of words in Portuguese that I didn't know anymore, or didn't know that Portuguese people had a different word for it from like Brazil. So yeah, practicing things regularly is quite important. And also embracing your mistakes. You're going to make a lot of those, so we're going to talk about that too. And the importance of focused communities. For example, the one we have here, GeekSessions. So yeah, let's go into each one of these in a bit more detail. So identifying goals. Before you start anything, you should really set your goals. You should stop and think, why is it that you want to learn this new skill? So, what do you want to do with it? In the case of programming, most people will think, I want to build an app, or I want to learn programming because tech jobs kind of pay well and I want to, get more money. Those are all very, very fine goals. It's fair enough, like it's all up to you, but it's important that you set your goals, right? Because if you don't really know where you're going, you won't know when you get there. And that's the second thing. So to have a very good definition of done, I think that's a very common term in technology. So how will you know when you achieved it? For example, in my case with Spanish was, I went to Seville for a concert, and I got there and I was able to sit at a bar, order a beer. Maybe I sounded a bit funny, but not like a complete idiot. I got a beer and I was able to pay for it and leave and didn't get arrested. So small goals, but they count, right? So yeah, the other thing as well is how strict are you about the goal you're setting and your definition of achieving that goal. And the reason I say this is because, for example, for me, when I started learning Spanish, my original goal was to be able to watch Spanish series and not need subtitles in English or Portuguese. I just wanted to load something up on Netflix and be happy to be watching it in the original language and not be too bothered. As I started learning about music, I'm really into music, so some of the Spanish rock bands, I really, really like them. There's a lot of things in Mexico and, South America as well that's amazing. And so because of that, my goals kind of changed. I wanted to be able to really understand poetry and the deeper meaning behind the words and interpret songs and kind of like I kind of like to do that even in Portuguese and English and, any other language that I might understand. So my goals changed. So it's important that you kind of have that defined for yourself as well. So if it's a personal goal, you can maybe be very flexible and not really care about how strict you are. In professional settings, I think it's more common for us to have, what some people call SMART goals, or just, you talk to your manager and they're like, oh, you want a raise? You need to be able to prove that you can do this thing before I can give you more money. So it might be a bit more strict. Either way, define how strict your answer to these questions are, and you can go from there. And the other thing, and I guess the last thing I'm going to touch on the goals aspect is, are you going to think about the next level? So once you achieve this, and I would hope that if you set up to learn a new skill, you certainly will achieve it. What are you going to do with it? So you're learning perhaps front-end development. Do you want to then become a full-stack developer? Do you want to start working with design and focus on UX or accessibility? Or if you're going into cybersecurity, do you want to start as maybe red team or blue team, or eventually become a black hat hacker and take over the world? that's okay, but you need to take one step at a time and maybe think about all those options. And even as you progress, those options will kind of show themselves to you. So start looking at them and think what can happen after I achieve my goal. Yeah, and so you know what the kind of the end looks like. So if you go back to the beginning, try and start with the basics, right? So it's, most people will say we need to learn to walk before we can run, and that also applies in technology, right? So if it's a new programming language, or if you've never coded before and you're kind of learning how to program, you're going to have to get used to using a text editor. Some people hate Microsoft Word for some reason, but a lot of people will be used with that. So if you open a plain text editor and there's nothing there, how can you turn that into a website, right? Or turn that into an application that is native, like an iPhone app or a Windows app or even Android, whatever it is that you're trying to learn. So get used to like the basics of the syntax or foundational concepts. So if you take a different kind of industry, let's say, as I already mentioned, cybersecurity, get familiar with the concepts. So I mentioned red team, blue team. That's how we normally define people that are on the attack or the defense. And red teams they'll try to break into their own system sometimes to prove that the systems they have in the company are solid enough. And that's a very important job. And it's a legal way of doing kind of fun hacking stuff. And, blue team, you have to defend against that. It's also a very interesting role that you could take in cybersecurity. And there are many others, right? But the idea is that you should familiarize yourself with all these very basic concepts so that you kind of know where you're going. And one way you can do that is, you follow some basic tutorials, try not to change too much. You're kind of at the beginning, stick with what people are telling you, and soon enough, you'll feel the urge to experiment. And that's cool, like that's all right. In my case, for example, with Spanish, I will take your basic sentences that you say to someone when you meet them, hello, how are you, nice to meet you, what's your name, what do you do for work? And then from there, you kind of start talking about different things. And with technology, it's the same, right? So you're going to build a welcome page. It's going to have a hero banner, like some large text, a background image. Then you want to animate that, look into how can I create animations. And from there, you start to build on top of the previous steps, right? I guess the most important thing with this is that you find your pace. Learning should never be something overwhelming. So if you're feeling stressed about your learning journey, perhaps you're trying too hard, and you should take a step back and kind of try to see how you can make it more enjoyable for yourself. Sometimes if you're learning things for work, that can be difficult, but perhaps it's time you talk to the person that's guiding your learning there to make sure that you can accommodate for the pressure that you're feeling. And equally, it shouldn't be boring, right? So if you're doing those tutorials and you feel like you're constantly repeating the kind of things that you're building, some people will be familiar with the term like tutorial hell. It's kind of that, and maybe it's time then that you pick up the pace a little bit, right? But it's always about trying to keep an eye on it and make sure that you're not trying too hard or not being too easy on your learning journey. The next part is about regular practice and immersion. So as I said, when you're learning a spoken language, it's important that you really try and throw yourself into a world where that language is the only language that is spoken. So in my case, when I started Spanish, I was living in the UK, I was in lockdown, couldn't just hop on a flight and go to Spain and spend 6 months in there. Wouldn't have the money anyway, but if I could fly, I'd probably spend maybe 2 weeks. I couldn't do that, so I just messaged people, and I would spend a lot of my free time either consuming kind of Spanish media, not necessarily only from Spain, but also just talking to people and getting to know them. So yeah, with technology, we can try and make technology learning as much a part of our life as possible, right? So as I said, keep the exposure really, really high. In the case of technology, we can do it by reading blog posts, listening to podcasts. I think there are a lot of really, really good podcasts nowadays. Most people would have at least 1, 2, or maybe even 5 that they can recommend to you. Try and find those and listen to them. Watch conference talks. So mine is not necessarily technical, but there's plenty of talks that you can find on YouTube, or even attend events in person, like the PHP event we have coming up in July, where you can actually learn technical things, right? So the other thing as well is try and write about it, try and talk about it yourself, because I believe that the times where we learn the most is when we try to teach it to someone else. Because if we can't really explain something in simple terms, that means we don't understand it ourselves. So if you ask me about, how, machine learning works, I will give you the same thing as everyone else. Like, this is ChatGPT, you give it a prompt, it will guess, what you want to say next, and it will give it back to you. It might be right. Now, I'm not really familiar with the kind of deep aspects of machine learning and AI, but if you ask me about JavaScript as a language, I can complain about it all day, but I can tell you about the inner workings of it, right? So event loop, variable scoping, the evolution of JavaScript, ES6, ES7, 2019, TypeScript, everything that language has, because I've been using it for a long time and tried to learn it really in depth over the years. So, and also teaching people, right? As I said, I mentored quite a few folks during my career, and that's when I really think I've learned the most. So whatever it is, try and do it regularly, even if it's just a few minutes a day. So if you wake up in the morning and you only got like 20 minutes when you're having your coffee, read an article and open YouTube and pick up the first tutorial about something. Watch a little bit of that. It might be interesting. You can come back to it later. It might not be. Then just move on to the next one when you get a little bit more time. But the most important part is that you do it very, very frequently. The next part is about embracing your mistakes. So I guess if you ever try to code an app when you're following a tutorial and you're like, oh, I'm going to make this slightly different now, and you change a variable name and then everything kind of blows up, you don't know where to go, that's okay. Failure is a natural part of the learning process. So in my case with Spanish, I guess it was even funnier because Portuguese and Spanish are so close. There was a lot of words that I would try and use from Portuguese, and you might know Portugal is a thing, but it can only take you so far. And there's a few words that you really don't want to say to Spanish people coming from Portuguese. And to be fair, there's a few that I've learned in Brazil that are very harmless, and in Portugal apparently they mean completely different things. Won't give any examples because this is being recorded, but you probably know that there's quite a few of them. But yeah, so, embrace that, it's okay. I guess in the case of technology, it's actually not as embarrassing as when you're speaking to, a person in another language and they just start laughing and you don't know why. So yeah, just take it easy and don't be afraid to make mistakes. They are very much a part of your learning. The other thing as well is that, by looking at mistakes, you can kind of try and understand why, like what broke where, quite a few times. You can also try to understand whether that is a language thing that you wrote very incorrectly, because computers are dumb, right? If you don't tell them exactly what you want, they won't know what to do. But there's also times where you write something, it doesn't follow a best practice, and you realize that, maybe a little bit down the line, your app is behaving a bit weird, and it's because you didn't scope a variable correctly, and that variable is getting reassigned, and then values are kind of getting lost, or, they have different meanings. So yeah, trying to understand why those mistakes happen can be quite useful. And the other thing is, don't be afraid to ask for help. And we're going to touch on the community aspect next, but try and have people that you can go and just reach out to them and say, I'm kind of stuck here, do you mind giving me a hand? Just have some water. Yeah, and the last aspect I wanted to touch on is the idea of focused communities. And what I mean by this is, in a general sense, any group of people that have a common goal when it comes to learning. So in my case, I said I used an app called HelloTalk, and the way that app works, and there are many others, like Tandem, I guess, is a very popular one. as well. And the idea is you sign up, you tell them which languages you speak and which languages you're learning, and then they'll try and match you with one or more people that are on the other side of that. So in my case, I spoke English and Portuguese, and I wanted to learn Spanish, so they will look for Spanish people that are trying to learn English, and maybe I can help them, and they'll help me in return. So after you speak to a few of these people, you find that they have groups, or there's communities in Discord, for example, and many other places. Even WhatsApp groups really are fine. But the idea is that learning can definitely be a social activity, and if you find these people, and you join a community that has a similar goal to yours, it kind of builds up synergy, right? So when you're feeling not quite as motivated as you were before, maybe you've been facing a challenge and you're like, oh, perhaps coding is not for me, or, oh, I'm fine coding this language, I think the other one is too difficult. So I had it with, when I tried to move from JavaScript to compiled languages, I started looking at C# at some point, and I'm like, why do I want to learn this? Like JavaScript is so easy. Why do I have to define all the variables and then compile everything, and then compilation breaks, and I don't know why? Or with Rust, where you try to compile something and the compiler's like, oh, you use this variable here, but you're trying to use it here again, and that's like you're not borrowing the value correctly. And it's like, what does that even mean, borrowing? Don't have that in JavaScript. So yeah, it's like those things can be quite detrimental to your kind of self-esteem and your motivation. So having other people that are like, oh yeah, I faced that as well, maybe look at this, and you go there and you're like, oh, you're right, it's not that scary. So it kind of keeps you in the path. The other thing is, as you're all here, obviously you kind of know that, but attend meetups and conferences and in-person kind of gatherings. It's important because when we meet other people online, it's kind of difficult to kind of build strong connections with them. Some people would disagree on this, and I kind of go back and forth a little bit. But having people that you actually see and you can meet up and not only talk about the one thing you're learning, will help you build stronger connections. And the idea of meetups and conferences as well is that these people that you meet might have a very important role in your life in the future. So in my case, for example, the first time I gave maybe not the first time, but one of the times in the past that I gave a tech talk, it was at a company in Jersey, and I tried to kind of start a meetup thing in there, and there was no one that was like really wanted to do it. So this company reached out to me on Slack. We had a little tech group in there, and they were like, oh, you can use our offices for it. So I went there, I did a talk, this other guy did a talk as well on TypeScript, and this was in 2018, I think. TypeScript was not quite as widely adopted yet, and the company was really interested in TypeScript, so they started using it, and they're still using it to this day. So that was a very positive change for them. Also, I got to meet the director of the company at the time and some of their devs. And now that's the company that I actually work for. So, that fast forward, I guess, 5 years, they are a big part of my life. And that's all because I tried to do this meetup thing, and, I met some interesting people there. And yeah, so that's the idea of kind of connecting with others and building these meaningful connections that will have a real impact in your life, probably. And that's kind of it. I know it's not quite as exciting as our previous talk with AI and how you can bin your Office suite, which I'm all for. But yeah, the idea is that, when you're learning something new, try and set up goals, take small steps, do it at your own pace. Really, definitely practice regularly. Make sure you keep doing it. Just embrace your mistakes, accept that you make them. Try and join communities. Like this one, I very accidentally came across GeekSessions in a different event that I attended a couple of months ago. And I was really happy because I've been in Portugal for, the better part of 18 months. And I was like, people in the Algarve do not code? That's impossible. Do they really like going to the beach that much that there's no developers in here? Sure enough, I was wrong. There are developers in here, and I was very happy to find out that they exist. So, join these communities. And that's it, really. Thank you very much.